Good evening. Lessons will be learned following a review into the deaths of an elderly couple who were found dead during one of the coldest weeks of the year.
The bodies of Derek and Jean Randall were found at their home in Northampton in January. It's thought they could have been dead for several days. Today, a review said the deaths could not have been prevented, even if the local care services had acted differently.
The Randalls' bungalow, snow on its roof, where inside a neighbour found their bodies. The headlines followed: a husband and a bedridden wife, abandoned in the bitter cold by social services. But that was untrue. The conclusion, 8 months on, by a serious case review. Mr Randall was offered support, it says, but turned it down.
Mr Randall was a carer who loved his wife and was determined and believed that he was the best carer she could have. The lessons we've taken from this are that sometimes when people exercise those choices to continue looking after themselves, that can leave people perhaps not receiving the services or the help and support they need, even though they've made that choice.
Private people, the pensioners lost contact with their family, but in the weeks here leading up to their deaths, we're told support agencies visited 17 times, including house calls from a GP and district nurse. They were offered home help and respite care too. It's a question that's come out of this review. If you offer someone help but they refuse to take it, like Derek Randall did, what next? Change the law?
I don't think the law should be changed to allow people to be forced to do something that they don't want to do. I think it's important that people are allowed to make their own choices about the care they should receive. They shouldn't be forced to accept the involvement of any agencies.
A couple died of natural causes. One had lung cancer, the other heart problems. Home care couldn't have saved them, say social services, but it would have made their final days more comfortable. Mike Cartwright, BBC Look East, Northampton.
Well, earlier today I spoke to Charlie McNally, the Director of Adult Social Services at the County Council in Northamptonshire, and I started by asking if he thought there was anything that could have been done to help Mr and Mrs Randall.
I think the serious case review looked at that very, very closely. This was a very independent couple, completely committed to each other, where Mr Randall felt that he was the best carer he could be for his wife, and actually they were not going to let anyone else care for them until they found their permanent solution, which was a residential care home for Mrs Randall.
But help was offered by both the local authority and by Age Concern, and it was turned down.
Mr and Mrs Randall were offered help at home called home care. They were offered some respite care as well. But Mr Randall believed until he'd identified a residential care home that he felt was good enough for his wife, that he was going to be the person who could care for her.
Do you think that the time has come for maybe a change in the law when, if the local agencies believe that help should be given, it is given?
I think help should always be made available to people, but actually we need to recognise that people have got choices to make. People want to have control over their own lives and not to have solutions imposed upon them by local authorities or the state. Mr and Mrs Randall chose to care for each other, and Mr Randall was an excellent carer for his wife. It's just unfortunate their underlying health conditions caused them to die in their own homes before that solution was found.
Do you think that this tells us something about society as a whole today?
I think it's a very sad case, but it's not a case whereby Mr and Mrs Randall were invisible to their community. They had some fantastic neighbours who were supporting them, cooking meals for them, helping them out in many, many ways. So this was not about an invisible couple who were abandoned by their communities. This was a couple that was very heavily supported by their communities.
Mr McNally, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
A couple from Cambridgeshire who were suspected of hurting their 3-month-old son have spent nearly 2 years fighting to clear their names. Now, after a landmark legal ruling, they won the right to tell their story. Well, here's our chief reporter, Kim Riley.
Jake and Victoria Ward can talk now about the nightmare that engulfed them after tests showed their baby son William's lower right leg was broken. Neither Jake nor Victoria could explain the injury. Cambridgeshire County Council put William on the Child Protection Register and applied for a care order. Now, that was in July 2005. The couple were arrested on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm and child cruelty. Both worked for the County Council and they were suspended from their jobs. William was allowed to stay in the family home, but never to be alone with his parents. Gordon Jays was Cambridgeshire's Director of Children's Services at the time. He tells the Panorama programme tonight that they were right to intervene. There was a serious injury to a baby for which there was no immediate rational explanation. Unfortunately, it's a social worker's job to think the unthinkable because sometimes terrible things happen. Eventually, the Crown Prosecution Service decided not to prosecute. William was nearly 2 when the case was heard in the family courts. The judge found no cogent evidence that Jake and Victoria had injured their son. Victoria Ward kept a video diary. This was her reaction to the news.
I can't really believe it. We're not allowed to see the judgment, except for one paragraph, the 96th paragraph. And, yeah, that's supposed to be good news, and it's supposed to mean that it's over. But I think we need somebody to tell us that.
Ultimately, it all hinged on the evidence of one medical expert who said it was wrong to assume child abuse just because there was no other explanation for the injury. The Wards then won a High Court battle to lift some of the onerous reporting restrictions and secrecy surrounding family courts. And you can hear the full story of the Wards' fight for justice in Panorama. Please Don't Take Our Child. That's on BBC One tonight at 8:30. Amanda.
Kim, thank you very much indeed. Well, still to come on Look East, the couple who've lost 25 stones between them after undergoing gastric surgery.
There's a full roundup of the sport, and we're looking back at the V Festival.
Hello, I'm Javier.
Hello, I'm Richard. We are half the Stereophonics, and we're at the V